And welcome to the Big Gunner Podcast. Well, more giant news without giant news. The fact that they don't have a quarterback yet, a free agent signing quarterback. And today it looks like Jameis Winston will be in town for a 2-day visit. Find that to be somewhat fascinating, although we did have wins over Pittsburgh and Baltimore last year. I kind of wasn't sure the way the direction is and the way everybody was talking about a Flacco, Wilson, or Rodgers meeting, but none of the transpired that none of them got offered deals or have a deal in place. And now we have Jameis Winston in town, who I thought at one point last year as I watched him, I kind of liked him a little bit, and kind of really thought he would be a good fit for us to move forward as a stopgap for till we get our guy. And yeah, it's back on the table, and I think it's an interesting fix. I mean, I go back to the year before Tom Brady won the Super Bowl with Tampa, that he had threw 30 touchdown passes. Just the problem was he had 30 INTs, and I think if you can correct that mindset of that over aggressiveness that might throw him into being turnover prone, if Brian Dable can help that situation and bring him down, I think he would be an interesting guy to take a look at. But either way, I think the Giants need to do something at this position by a free agents to a point where I think they need to get somebody in the room and that can lead this team at week one. I just am not sure that when you draft a guy in this situation of these players, do you have a week one quarterback there? But I have faith in Dable, and I think he'll figure it out. But anyway, Jameis Winston in town for an interview, and I think we're going to see what happens. I still think my number one guy would be Aaron Rodgers. The stories run that Aaron Rodgers reached out for the Giants a few weeks back, and they talked. And then the Steelers popped up as an option after Fields signed with the Jets, and all this, things that have happened that the dominoes fall one way and then everything else adjusts. But I know this. The one thing that I really know is the position will be addressed, I think, with a free agent and in the draft. I would like to see even 2 picks you get used for quarterbacks in the draft. I think you fill up the room with all the potential, and then you see what you have moving forward after, mini camp, some OTAs, and then, of course, training camp. And then you sit there and you go with your best player week one and then think about the future. I just think that the pressure's on Shane and Dable especially, because he's going to call the shots on this at this time about the quarterback. They might bring in the guys that they think are appropriate, but the guy who starts week one is going to be Dable's call, in my opinion. And I think that's what the Giants need to do, is get the guys in there that they think are best for now. And I don't care about 2026. In my personal viewpoint, if you're not thrilled with the Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders situation being at the top of the draft, is one of those going to be there at 3? There's potential there might not be, and you're not in love with either one of them. I say, to me, the number one guy is Jackson Dart. I said last year that the number one guy I thought was Jaden Daniels. I just like the way he was coached up. I like some of the throws he's made, his ability to move. He can run. He can do it a lot. That's who I like out of the 3 guys. And I think he's a lesser price. So you could probably trade up with a team that might be wanting to take Sanders or Ward or somebody at 3, or take a player that they want, and maybe get a number one pick in 26, where you can have 2 number ones. And maybe if you don't solve this thing, the new GM's got a better situation. That would be, to me, the ideal situation. Trade down to 9, maybe get a chance at Jackson Dart, or 15, and get maybe a number 2 and a number 1 for next year, number 2 this year, and now you have 5 picks in the first 3 rounds. That's what the Giants need. They need players. I like what we've done in free agency so far, addressing the defensive backfield. I did not want to go in with Deontay Banks being our number 1 corner for a second straight year and being the leader in the locker room. I just didn't think our secondary played well enough. I like what Ty Newman gave us and Andrew Phillips. And I think adding these 2, Javante Holland and Adebo, I think we were in good shape in the secondary. I think you still might want to draft a corner anyway, just to add depth, but I think we're going to be solid there. I like that we haven't got rid of Okereke. I think our defensive line will need to be upgraded a little bit depth-wise. I think we addressed a little bit of that in free agency. And I think we need to get a stud tackle next to Dexter Lawrence. I think, if you're going to hang on to Thibodeau, then I think you need to put another guy in there for a 4-man rush that can help him. But yeah, I mean, I like what the defense is trying to do. And then, on the offensive line, the rumors are now we're going to move Evan Neal inside. I think that's a great move. If we stay healthy, I think our line will be fine. I think if we stay healthy, Aaron Rodgers would feel like looking at our personnel that he might be interested in coming. Because the number one thing I thought I saw with the older quarterback is it's in your mindset that everything's winding down. And you're playing probably for the idea that your competitiveness will want to play, more for the idea you're getting a really healthy paycheck. And then the third thing is probably the idea that can you go far enough to get a ring? Um, I believe that the Giants, aren't close to a ring, but I believe that we are closer to a playoff spot than people think. And I just think we need to stay healthy. The name of the game is injuries. The name of the game is your defense and offensive lines. And if we could figure out how to solve those equations, stay healthy on those at those positions, I think we have a chance to win games. And I know the schedule is brutal. I know we play 6 playoff teams, Dallas and the 49ers at home. So we're going to be an underdog in every home game. But I've seen crazier things happen in the NFL. I go back to the 2000 season with the Rams when, Trent Green gets hurt in an injury. Kurt Warner comes in. Nobody knows this. And the Rams go from 4-12 to win the Super Bowl. And now everybody heard of Kurt Warner. You just go back and look at some of the past history that teams have made leaps and bound jumps to get there to go far. You don't see it as often now. But I got faith. It's hard to say that after what we're watching the last couple of years. But I believe in Brian Dable. A little question about Joe Shane, but I hopefully he had the right draft and maybe we get the right pieces and he learns from his mistakes last year and keeps the right glue. I mean, the Darius Slayton move I think is all indicative on what happened with Barkley. I mean, from a culture situation. When John Mara comes out and says Saquon Barkley is by far our most popular player. Basically telling Shane, be careful how you treat this because from a fan standpoint, this is a big move you're making. And he really looked at it from more of a business standpoint. And now we're seeing now that the running back position, if you stay healthy, is probably more important than, being ranked as one of the lower positions on a pay scale in National Football League. And I get it. 11 guys go out to attack you as you run the ball. You're the guy who's taking the most shots on the offense. But, these guys were back out. Barkley was a thick guy. I think his injuries were unfortunate. Happening on a couple on the sidelines, getting rolled up on, on a short yardage play in Arizona 2 years ago. It just stuff like that. You can't help. But look what happens when he stays healthy. He gets 2,000 yards and, they win the Super Bowl. So that being said, move on. I know I have to stop with the grief, but it's hard to let that go. I'm very emotional when it first happened. Maybe my emotion was right back then. I let it all loose because I felt there was a problem not letting him go in the division. But the Darius Slayton signing for that kind of money tells me, and I go back to, I said it last week, but I go back to that Seattle game when Neighbors was hurt. We go out and get an unexpected win as a 7-point underdog against Seattle, and Slayton goes for over 100 and a couple touchdowns, I think, or a touchdown at least. And so that's what you want out of your wide receiver. And I like when Malik Neighbors said Darius Slayton helped him become more of a professional. That kind of player you want to have in the locker room. And so kudos to Joe Shane for putting it out there, probably overpaying him. But I really don't have a problem if somehow he's part of the offensive glue, being that we don't have a leader as a quarterback right now. Of course, we will address that, and hopefully we do with one of these 4 guys, either Winston, Rodgers, Wilson, or Flacco, and maybe, hopefully it's Aaron Rodgers. That would be my pick. Now, we'll come back to you if there's any bigger moves next week. Hopefully we know something about the quarterback. But now the best time of the year. So I would have to say that outside of maybe Giant football, March Madness, the first weekend of the NCAA tournament, is probably the best time of the year. I remember playing softball with my guys in the early 2000s and taking our trips out to Vegas before it was even as popular as it was today. And, all getting rooms and sitting there for 12 hours on the crap table, watching games, making your bets, going back and forth. It was a great day. Got up at 9 o'clock and it shut down around 10 o'clock at night. And it was just awesome 4 days of nonstop basketball, college basketball, best time of year. So today we're going to give you a bracket that I have. It's not a really one surprise a lot of people, but my philosophies are this. I think the lead stories, I'll take three of them for me from a gambling perspective and a tournament perspective. Was one, North Carolina getting in caused a little bit of a ruckus, but they got a great name. You don't hear as much about it because people want to see a team like North Carolina in a tournament. They have all that history. But one win, lost 12 losses, just didn't really show in their resume that they should have gotten in. I think a lot had to do with their comeback loss to Duke. But again, being the head of the committee, Bubba Cunningham was the AD at North Carolina and had to recuse himself from any of the talk of North Carolina. Showed me that there's might be a little bit of bias in the room, that your leader is the guy from the AD of the school that they're in question. So, and he basically said that if UAB had beaten Memphis in the final game of the championship week, it would have happened that North Carolina would have been out and UAB would have been in. Instead, that's what happened. They had the bracket all paired off, and then they go and rank it. It was a different system, and you'll hear about this more and more as the games play on about how they got to these points. But that was one story. One. Number two is the SEC got 14 teams in. Find that to be very fascinating. Unheard of. I think 11 was the most prior to that. And they get 14 teams. LSU and our beloved South Carolina, the only two teams that didn't go in. And South Carolina actually had 2 wins this year over 5 seeds. They beat Michigan, they beat Clemson. So that'll tell you how tough the SEC conference is. So betting tidbits for that for the SEC is there are 5 SEC teams out of the 14 that are underdogs in the first week. I'm going to start off by making a pick right now. On Wednesday, Xavier plays Texas. And I think Xavier's a 3-point favorite. I don't know why, but other than the game is being played in Ohio, close to Xavier's campus. And I think that'd probably be what it is. I think Texas will travel people to the game. I think the crowd should be somewhat of a mixed crowd, maybe a little bit pro Xavier, but I think you'll see a lot of Texas burnt orange in the crowd. And the line's gone from 1.5 to 3. And I have a tendency to like a little bit more of the earlier line move to see that maybe those guys get in and see if it comes back down. But I'm going to say my first pick today is Texas +3 in the late play-in game on Wednesday. And I think the other dogs, which are Vanderbilt, Georgia, I think I was going over this yesterday, Oklahoma, who's getting 5 now from Connecticut. And Arkansas is getting 5 from 4.5 from Kansas, which is expected. But Arkansas gets a player back. I think those games are going to be interesting games to watch. And I think if you bet those 5 underdogs, I think you probably go 3-2. So if you want a quick profit with a little action, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the 5 underdogs will be a plus figure if you take them all in the SEC. Before we get into brackets, I'll give you my one pick of the weekend. I think I got to watch the Utah Valley Grand Canyon game. Very interesting game. A lot of talent on both sides, and we forget Bryce Drew, the coach is the coach of Grand Canyon, I believe. And I think he's got them tournament ready. They played well last year. They have a lot of athletes. They have a couple maybe guys who are going to get looks in the NBA. I think they're going to be hard on Maryland. So I'm going to go on a limb and say Grand Canyon not only plus the 10, but sneaks the upset in on Maryland. Maryland a little unimpressive in a loss to Michigan. Was very impressive in a win over Illinois. But we're going to have to see that there's going to be one upset. And that will be my biggest upset of the first round. And for the first time, I am not taking an upset in the first top 3 seeds of any bracket. I just look at it like I think the power's there. That might happen. I'm sure it will. It always does, but it's hard to pick. When you're picking these games out and you're trying to put a bracket together, and I've always been one to have the underdogs, but the last couple of years I've faltered when I try to take a 12 to the Sweet 16 or 13 seed gets to the Elite 8, and you're all excited because you got that underdog run that you always want to have. But I just think with NIL, and I think the power of the money and the players orchestrating and maneuvering around to go to the right teams to play with the right guys, very similar to what the NBA does. I think it's going to limit the chance for the big upset. That's just a call of mine, I think. But, when I get down to my bracket, I'm going to do something I've never done before, and I will get into that shortly. So we're going to go with Texas and Grand Canyon for our 2 plays. today. I'll throw out another one at the end of the day for another play. Again, in the underdogs in the SEC. But if I can get to the brackets and show you my pool, I don't think I have a picture of it, but I can just walk you through it. Um, I'm going to get right into the Sweet 16 in the South region. I think Auburn will end up meeting Texas A&M. Will get by Yale and get by Michigan, um, and Auburn will advance. And I think Iowa State will play Michigan State, and Iowa State will advance in that game. Iowa State gets their players back. I think they were a top-ranked team all year. Michigan State looked a little faltering in the Big 12, in the Big 10 tournament, losing their game to Wisconsin. And I just think that Auburn and Iowa State will probably be the two teams that get out of the Elite Eight. Um, in the Western region, out in San Francisco, I think it'll be Florida, and Colorado State is playing very well. I think one of the other story number 3 that I didn't get into was Colorado State is a 12 seed against a 5. Now we always know in the history of the tournament that the 12-5 games were always the big upset picks. That everybody thought the 12 would always be one of these Cinderella stories that you'll end up getting. A couple of years recently, it hasn't happened as often as it once was. But there's something in this game that I don't think I've ever seen before. The 12 seed, Colorado State, is a 2-point favorite over Memphis. Now, all the upsets I've ever seen, and these teams used to be back in the day, in the early part of my gambling life, I would say they would probably be double-digit favorites, maybe 7, 8, 9 points. And then in the last decade or so, they get down into the 3 to 5 range now that these games become closer matchups. But I recollect, and I asked Defo that the other day when we were on Bury Your Bookie, if he had seen that. And I asked a couple of guys who are guys who understand prices, have they seen that? And no, we can't really remember a situation where it comes to mind that was happening. So I find it very fascinating that Colorado State is favored over Memphis. So I'm going to ride that little wave with the bookmaker being right on that and say that they get to the Elite Eight after popping the Colorado State, the 12-13 game against Grand Canyon. Very tough game. Either one team could win at that point, but I like Colorado State will play Florida, and then I think their Cinderella story gets dropped. And then there's Texas Tech, who I think will get through their games and against Missouri. I think Missouri beats Drake, and that's a popular upset pick. I'd probably get a Drake cover, but I think Missouri still finds a way with their interior presence. Great to get by that game. And then we get to Kansas St. John's game. I think Kansas probably ends up beating Arkansas. Bill Self against Rick Pitino, those legendary coaches. And I think St. John's finds a way to beat Kansas in their first big test, and then they get Texas Tech. And then I think both Florida and St. John's does beat Texas Tech, so I get them in the Elite Eight. If I go around to the Midwest region, I see Clemson getting by McNeese in a tight game. I think High Point might shock Purdue, and I think Houston just has an easy path a little bit to get to Clemson. And I think Houston will end up beating Clemson, and I think that's what you'll see there. And I think it'll be an SEC matchup in the Midwest in the Elite Eight. I think Kentucky gets through the Elite Eight. They get to the Sweet 16, and they play Tennessee. And I think Tennessee wins a close one, even though Kentucky's beating them, in a regular season. I think Tennessee gets the edge here. I think they're playing a little better, and I think they'll find a way to get by that game. And then we get to the Elite Eight matchups where I got Auburn and Iowa State, and I find Auburn is the better team and wins that game. Florida will beat St. John's. I just think there's too much offense, and I think St. John's runs into a little bit of a buzzsaw. And then I like Houston to get by Tennessee. I think Houston's in, and Duke. So unfortunately, for the first time in my bracket busting page, I have the number 1 seeds making it all the way in. Not as much fun for the fan base, the underdog lover, but CBS gets a little bit about what they want, getting the Duke, Houston, Auburn, Florida matchups. I think Florida ends up playing Houston, who gets by Duke. I think Florida ends up beating Houston, and the national champions. We're going to stay in our lovely state of Florida here and give it to the Gators. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way. I think clearly they're the number 1 pick right now by a lot of the ESPN, analysts are saying that. And I look at that as being where I think where I think the tournament's going. I think it'll be a great tournament. I think the games hopefully will be competitive on all angles. I also have a couple of other picks that I'm going to give out here now. Michigan Everybody all of a sudden's falling in love with San Diego week game one. And I looked at it and I said, I don't know if I ever remember, very similar to the Colorado State being a 2 point favorite, but I remember that the Big Ten champion in the first round is only a 2.5 point favorite. And so that is really intriguing to me. So I'm going to take Michigan on the money line and say that they get by that game, that they got on a little roll here at the Big Ten tournament, and they would, they would get by their game. And then I look at, I look at Montana. I like Montana. I'm a big underdog. You try to find these 17-point dogs or more in these spots, and I think Wisconsin doesn't have that pedigree of big blowout wins. They don't play tempo like this. So I think it might be a little bit of a slower game, if I may say, and I think the 17 might hold up here with Montana. I watch and think they got some players there. So that'd be a kind of an outside dog. I don't think they win the game, but I think they can stay competitive. So we're going to give you Texas, Michigan, Montana, and Grand Canyon. We're going to come back next week with our Sweet 16 picks, and hopefully more Giant news. And stay tuned. We're going to be on the DFO tomorrow, and go to Big Gunner 1984 on Instagram for our daily picks as we throw out some NBA hockey. Last night we had a really bad one in the NBA, got blown out with Toronto. But we're hanging tough. We're around that 50 percentile. So if you're struggling, you might want to take a listen to what we got. I did bring up all the pointers about the tournament that I see, and we'll come up with some more pointers leading in. Again, I also like the idea of taking the top conference in the country with 14 teams in the SEC as all their underdogs. So we'll keep go Big Blue. We're going to keep Giant action. Hopefully we get a quarterback to talk about next week. More picks coming. I'll see you on No Filter TV on Thursday with Defo at 9:15. And good luck to you and happy madness.